I'm delighted to welcome my friend and CWI board member Shelly Kurtz to this afternoon's important conversation around her book, This Little World. Shelly Kurtz is a serial social entrepreneur. She's been a co-founder of various enterprises that have all successfully met their goals. And her book, for me, when I read the draft, was provided an amazing tapestry of how technology, when harnessed, can provide the tools for nonprofits to do good. So This Little World, this title comes from a well-known William Shakespeare play, Richard II. This royal throne of kings, this scepter's isle, this earth's majesty, this happy breed of men, this little world, this precious stone set in the silver area. The speaker of these words is an aged statesman who expresses his love for his country and its people. But he's also worried about the clouds he sees on the horizon. Every leader worries about the clouds on the horizon. We all worry about change, the economy, the public appetite for our work. And in the nonprofit world, we worry about donor interest. Shelly Kurtz, welcome.
Thank you so much, Gary. I'm excited to be here, and it's appropriate that the theme of this month's Older Americans Month is powered by connection. And you are in DC in studio, and I'm here in the Pacific Northwest. And
how about that?
All over the U.S. And I really appreciate the time today.
Thank you, Shelly, and thank you to all the audience members who have dialed in and are watching from around the country this afternoon. We welcome you to this conversation. So Shelly, share with me your story and then share with me why this book.
Yeah, well, thank you. Well, my story is like most people's stories. They don't necessarily predict where they end up, and the road that got them to where they are is a little windy. You know, very few people that I know in the workforce today had a very specific trajectory that was plotted out for them. And, 50 years ago, people didn't have the ability to shift and move through sectors and industries in the way that we do today. But mine is a similar story. I spent about 25 years in the private sector. I started in local public affairs at a TV station, and I really learned about the importance of community engagement and working through opportunities to support local communities, which is part of the role of local broadcasters that most people don't recognize, was mandated by the Federal Communication Commission, a federal agency, to ensure that there is local connection, local programming, adherence to children's programming acts. So I worked through early compliance and government regulation, as well as producing public affairs content that best met the needs of those that were furthest from opportunity through the medium of television, and then ended up going through about 15 years as a multicultural marketer, where I had the opportunity to connect ethnic communities that mostly spoke a different language at home with content and programming in their language. And so I really learned about the power of creating content and being able to use technology to distribute it around the world. We were bringing in television from Japan and China and Russia and Vietnam. And this was really powerful for people to feel the connection of their language. And so from there, I ended up moving into the world of startups and technology. And through this journey, I found a co-conspirator, and we created a technology innovation center where we recognize that the opportunities in the private sector to scale, to create once and serve many, to lower costs and use infrastructure were really opportunities that were still available in the nonprofit sector, and that this was a sector doing incredible work and that there needed to be a bridge for that experience. And so we created an innovation lab, and from that created multiple technology companies and products that serve nonprofits. And through that work, I got to meet you, and we're here today. So I'm really excited about the opportunity to share what I have learned and what has happened over the last 10 or 20 years in technology through this book and through organizations like yours.
Thank you. So Tabby, this little world looks at social innovation through case studies and the uniqueness of these approaches in informing mission and outcomes. Speak to me today about some of these examples of how technology being adapted by social enterprises have realized successful outcomes.
Sure. Well, we do cover a lot of case studies, and I know that technology is a big topic, and it can be kind of overwhelming to think about it writ large. And so we try to look at really big organizations that have created new innovation, and also very, very small nonprofit organizations and how they've been able to create and adapt technology. So I'll start small. We were looking at ways to help understand the needs of nonprofits and ways in which matching technologies and other cloud-based mobile applications could really make an impact on the ground from the perspective of nonprofit practitioners. And so we did a listening tour around the US and convened small groups of nonprofits across all different issue areas. And one of those happened to be in Omaha, Nebraska. And we just openly asked about the problems and challenges that they were experiencing. And we learned about a scenario with a nonprofit that is called Project Harmony in Omaha, Nebraska. And they are a child advocacy center, which is a place where children go once there has been an allegation of abuse or neglect. And it's part of the justice system where there's a forensic interview, that very first critical opportunity to hear from the child and to mitigate PTSD and other issues of having to have the child repeat their story. That testimony is recorded on video. And the person that came to this focus group that day said the challenge was those videos get distributed over and over again. They were being burned on DVDs, which was causing a lot of problems. As you can imagine, they were getting lost or stolen or mishandled. It was also a really long process to have someone burn a DVD and an investigator or prosecutor have to wait for that to be transcribed and shipped or mailed or driven across state. And so we recognized there was an opportunity to create a technology tool. But instead of creating a system just for that one nonprofit in Omaha that serves 6,000 kids a year, we really looked at the landscape and took it one level up to understand the broader sector opportunity for digital transformation, and wanted to also make sure there wasn't an existing system that could have met the needs. And so that's a really important part of technology for nonprofits, is first to understand what is out there and to learn how to navigate that. And if you don't know, it's very easy to think that you need to create something from scratch. And this organization was looking to create their own system. But we learned that there were 1,000 of these nonprofit organizations around the US, none of which had a digital evidence tool that could easily transmit, protect, secure, and deliver these child interviews. And so that's an example where we started with one nonprofit organization with a very small part of the problem to digitize. And we created an entire product and then a company to serve that specific mission of delivering secure evidence and protecting that content in a way that was cheaper, faster, and better than what had been done before. And now, today, 6 years later, over 300,000 videos are protected, and it's being used by 11,000 agencies around the US, nonprofits and law enforcement agencies. So that's an example where we started at ground zero and built something that was really mission critical, and yet took a systems approach to ensure that it would be sustainable and that these individual nonprofits would not have to maintain their own software. So I would say that that's one example of using technology. And today now, it's not only protecting and distributing the evidence, but it is allowing the individual organizations to have a way to see data they never knew before.
And Shelly, and the name of the nonprofit's called what?
The nonprofit in Omaha, Nebraska is called Project Harmony, and the digital evidence solution we created is called Guardify. And now it's protecting all evidence across the US for prosecutors and district attorneys. So that's an exciting example of technology from the ground up, and we cover a lot of that case study in the book.
So if I'm in the agent and or workforce space, and I just heard you describe this case study, two things comes to mind when it comes to technology. One is to try to find out what's out there by way of tools, platforms, softwares that can help us navigate our space in a way that brings relevant information that informs our mission. Is that correct?
Yes, so often we see nonprofits starting from scratch. They are doing an all or nothing approach. They sort of decide they need to get into, a new technology approach, and they start from scratch, hiring high-priced consultants or, building out a budget that is not informed from the market, but really what is available, or perhaps there's a grant that is matched in, instead of really taking a landscape approach and seeing what are their peers doing, what might be a creative use of an existing tool or software solution from another industry, or more often, even another nonprofit use case. Maybe it's not a workforce development tool, but maybe it's something that's been working well in the mentoring space, for example, matching mentors to mentees, or something else that could be adapted. Maybe it's from an immigration example, but we really want to ensure that nonprofits are spending their time and resources doing what they do best, which is usually not building technology.
So you were asking us to be curious, correct?
You need to get very curious. And one of the things that's overwhelming is to even know which questions to ask. Sometimes it's a lost in translation moment where to go open a Google search and type in what you think you're looking for may not bring up the results of the best, most specific targeted technology tools. So we actually created a platform that is a collection of almost 4,000 technology tools that are purpose-built for nonprofits. And you can search by your impact area, whether you're a food bank or a job skilling center, or you're looking for a specific solution in one piece of your workflow. Go to x4i.org. That's X, the letter X and the number 4 and I, x4i.org. We have a tech directory there that really uses natural language to be able to match solutions. That's one example. There are a lot of other resources available.
So Shelly, I wanted to get back to how we met. So you kind of glossed over Giving Tech Labs. And I wanted to speak to that in a moment, because that company that you co-founded is pretty illustrative of the work you've done before and after, which is to use technology and data source information to help identify clusters of issues relevant to your mission around which programming can be designed. So I want you to park and lock that thought for a second, because I want to get back to it. But there's something else I want to get to in this conversation, and it's this. In the US alone, the nonprofit community represents a 2.8 trillion industry comprising of almost 2 million organizations. In and of itself, this community would rank among the world's top 20 large economy. Businesses like Microsoft and others, sensing this opportunity, are developing platforms and services specifically for this sector.
Yeah,
And that
it's
gets us
bigger
the
than
tool.
anyone thinks. Yeah, we met with Satya Nadella, the CEO of Microsoft, in a private briefing a couple of years ago, and he was blown away that it was a $2.8 trillion industry. That's the nonprofit impact in the US. And yet it hasn't been looked at as an industry that has buying power and
Yes.
potential as a market driving force. And part of that is because of the way that nonprofits have come up, organized individually and not collectively. There hasn't been an M&A movement in the nonprofit
Yes. Yes.
sector to look at what works and scaling up. And
Yes.
so there's a lot of disconnected pieces. But if the nonprofit sector could look at itself as this powerhouse that it is, larger than the enterprise software industry globally, you could really start understanding that instead of feeling powerless at the last mile of technology innovation, you have the ability to be on the front lines. And Microsoft, Amazon, Google, Salesforce, and other large enterprise software companies have gotten the memo, and they are building purpose-built
Platforms.
solutions
Yes.
for donor management, for fundraising, for volunteers. And there is a lot of opportunity if you are to come in with that sense of confidence as opposed to that deficit mindset. And I think that the
Yes.
funding community is also looking at creating portfolio approaches and bringing together a broader, coalescence. But it's a challenge still. I know that you're doing some work with the American Workforce Coalition, bringing together peer organizations to advocate, share best practices, and go after funding partnerships together. And I think that's the model that we have to take moving forward.
Thank you for the plug, by the way. I appreciate that. I think part of the opportunity, and we mentioned the availability of software and platforms to support this sector. And the use of those resources can sharpen our messaging supported by data. But there's another significant movement afoot that's happening in the nonprofit space. Since the pandemic, we've seen a tremendous turnaround and turnover in leadership positions within the nonprofit space. I think some 50% of organizations have undertaken a leadership transition coming out of the pandemic, where you had an older generation of leadership that frankly just got tired. And the pandemic allowed them to really reflect on their lives and their priorities, their families, and their communities. And when you have change of leadership, you have new ideas coming into the conversation. And when you're harnessing technology with new leaders who are curious and who want to achieve great change within organizations that have strong foundations, that provides the opportunity for impact. What are your thoughts on that, Shelly?
Sure. Yeah, well, it used to be that you sort of picked a lane. You were going to be in the private sector or you were going to be in the civic sector. You sort of started and ended your career moving through those necessary changes in your career path, but always within the same construct. You were a nonprofit person or you were a private sector person. And now the lines are really blurred, and the opportunity to create an organization that is informed by people of all generations, of all different sector backgrounds is really exciting. And so what I'm seeing is folks, as you mentioned, that might have gotten burned out from nonprofit work are rolling into the private sector.
Yes.
Folks in the private sector that were part of the great tech layoffs over the last couple of years or coming out of COVID are finding really purposeful work in
Yes.
nonprofit organizations.
Yes.
And so I think this convergence zone is creating such a rich opportunity. You used the word tapestry earlier. And I know that you guys are launching a campaign coming up, I think next week, maybe, or maybe starting soon, called Generations Together, hashtag Generations Together,
Yes.
for all of you out
Yes.
there. And it's really about identifying companies and organizations of all sizes that are really welcoming and empowering to older Americans, which, by the way, includes almost all of us. And if it doesn't now, it will one day. It's the one segment of the sort of DEI work that everyone will be a part of, because we are all aging, we are all getting older. So if you know of an organization or a company that is doing a great job facilitating movement into their organization for older Americans or those from different backgrounds, definitely post it, shout it out. But I think that the opportunity to have fresh perspective is important. And that comes both ways. And I've seen the best work being done when we can look at leadership succession planning and organizational governance differently.
Yes.
And ideas can come from different places. And on the governance side, I will say that one opportunity for nonprofit boards is to really think about ensuring that you have representation from all sectors. And if you don't have a technology navigator in your inner circle, ensure that you do. And whether that's formally on the board so that you
Yes.
can have someone on your team to help, look out for new talent and opportunities, or be able to inform the work ahead. I think it's really important. But that example we just talked about with Guardify, the company that I co-founded.
I want to get
Yeah,
to Godify in a
yeah.
second, because so please hold that thought
A
for me.
perfect example. Yes.
So my next question really relates to one of the earlier chapters in your book, which I reframed as the way things were and the way things changed. And I'm alluding to the 100-year period from the 1870s to the 1880s, right through to the 1970s. Going back to the 1870s, few Americans had access to clean water, electricity, transportation, or long-distance communication. That's the way things were at that period of time. Yet on a one-by-one basis, a series of technological innovations occurred, changing the lives of Americans and others in our world's industrialized community. And between 1870s and 1970, there was a century-long outpouring of technology in which innovation brought economic prosperity for billions of people around the world. Didn't say that we didn't have those who didn't succeed, because for every person that was successful, there were a few who were left behind. We know that.
Yeah.
So that's how things were and how things had changed. Technological revolution lifted most, but not all, out of poverty. Shelly, how can we best ensure that technology can become a force for good?
I love that. Well, we could talk a lot about all of the ways that technology has opportunities in this time, but just to comment on a little bit of the historical perspective, to frame that, in 1870, the average lifespan was 45. So we wouldn't be having this conversation. Our grandchildren perhaps would be communicating instead. So today we have longevity because of technology, because of innovation, because of research and development, and thinking through what could be possible.
Yes.
And so I think a lot of times people think about technology only in the context of what's happening today around cloud computing and AI, and feeling very outside of that. And yet it's important to recognize that we have always been a country of innovation, that in
Yes.
fact, this is the human experience to innovate. And as far as how we can use technology to ensure that those furthest from opportunity are brought in, we need to be really intentional about it. And the people building technology need to look and act and feel like those that are going to be using the technology or that are the beneficiaries of it. So when you're thinking
Are
about
you
job,
are you proposing DEI? Are you saying that we have to make
we don't
sure that
like
there's diversity representation on boards, executive teams? Are you saying that, Shelly?
I'll tell you what, I have never written a line of code. I would never have considered myself a technologist. If you would have used that dirty word on me 10 years ago, I would have said, no way, that has nothing to do with me. I am not there. That's something else. That's someone else's job, usually a white man in a, in a hoodie. But the reality is whatever you want to call it, it's about making sure that we have a broad base of perspectives. And the most exciting innovation often happens at that last mile. And the closer you can get to the problem is where you're going to really be able to solve for all. Have you heard of the curb cutting effect? I'm sure that
I'm familiar with it. Yes.
yeah, Trisha Rakes talked about this, and it happened in Berkeley where they were looking to create accessibility for people on wheelchairs, and they actually cut the curb to be able to allow for the wheelchairs to roll. And what they found is by innovating for that very small population of those in wheelchairs, allowed for so many more possibilities that they hadn't thought about, like strollers for children,
Yes.
and children's bikes and scooters, and all sorts of other opportunities to help broader society. So I think the most exciting innovation is when you start with those furthest from the boardroom and get out of your office, go ride the bus, go talk to those that look different than you. Make sure that your inner circle includes those older, younger, darker, lighter, more technology, forward, broad-based understanding.
I think to add to your point, because I think inclusion is important, because inclusion helps us to understand perspectives and experiences. We talked about the great industrial revolution from the 1870s to the 1880s. Yet in the 1870s, the slaves were freed for 5 years, maybe 10, and many African Americans got the vote in 1965. Yeah. So you had a vast number of people who were disenfranchised.
Yeah.
I don't think women were voting in 1870 either.
No, I think that's one of the things. I certainly don't want the perspective of this book to be that tech is good for everyone. It's not, and we need to make sure we change that.
No, I do appreciate that. But the point I'm trying to make is that inclusion and equity is not always based around race.
That's right.
You have equity issues, inclusion issues, that also speaks to the disability community.
Absolutely.
The LGBTQ community, the Asian community. And in this country, we are a nation that is, and I was on a different conversation this morning, and I kept thinking to myself, of all the countries in the industrial world, which one would I wish not to age? And it's probably this one. Because the social safety nets in this country is not as strong as the social safety nets in other countries. Mm-hmm. So the charitable sector, oftentimes nonprofits, act as a substitute for shortfalls in policy and shortfalls in appropriations. And much of that is an outgrowth of culture.
Absolutely. We need to look at the systemic inequalities that exist and start getting to the root cause. And there are organizations doing incredible work in this space. And obviously, the Center for Workforce Inclusion is working with not just older Americans, but formerly incarcerated individuals, women, and people of color, those furthest from that opportunity. But there is a lot of exciting innovation that can happen when we come together from different perspectives. And to the point about the growth in innovation following the Industrial Revolution, we are in that time now as the pandemic being the proxy to that. this very disruptive, devastating time for America and for the global community is actually breeding so much opportunity to connect people that wouldn't have otherwise been able to have access. But I want to make sure that we don't forget something that I know our colleague Luis reminds us of always, which is that 54% of Americans do not read above a sixth grade level. We need to make sure that as the innovation and the technology advancement continues, we aren't leaving people behind, and that we are still looking at where the source of the problem begins and going upstream on those systemic opportunities. And I know one of the things that I talk about is some of the opportunity to democratize innovation, democratize philanthropy, and looking at ideas coming from anywhere, which is an exciting movement. This week, Melinda French Gates announced $1 billion for nonprofits and an open call to submit. So I'm really excited about what happens when communities can advocate directly, and small organizations and marginalized communities get the same chance at the table.
Shelly Kurtz, you are a wealth of information, and much of this is contained in your book. Shelly's book can be found at it's not yet published, to be published very shortly. But for more information about this book, please visit www.thislittleworld.org. www.thislittleworld.org. Shelly, tell us about Giving Tech Labs, which is how we met, and then pivot for a moment, please, into your experiences with the award-winning Tech for Good company, Guardify.
Sure. So Giving Tech Labs was really an opportunity that started with the inspiration of Jeff and Trisha Rakes, who are philanthropists that came to their plot in life, not from a legacy of philanthropy, but from their time at Microsoft. They were the first couple to meet and marry at Microsoft, and Jeff went on to be the CEO of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and then they started their own foundation and really encouraged us to think differently about impact and the opportunity to use data and technology innovation to solve real problems. And so our very first project at Giving Tech Labs was the creation of a portal to bring information more fully forward for charitable organizations and the work that was really being done on the ground that wasn't getting the headline news, perhaps from the New York Times or Washington Post. And so that was called Giving Compass. GivingCompass.org today is a collection of resources that I encourage everyone on the call to check out. But that was our first project where we really took a technology approach to opening up the world's information about how to give better. And we really wanted to bridge the gap using technology. And so it's an open access web form that is now using AI and developing a lot of other tools. But we recognize this convergence where we could take, opportunities from philanthropy and the foundation side and looking at how to meet the needs of everyday donors, everyday, nonprofit organization practitioners. And so we started getting curious, and through that started investigating different areas of impact. And we used the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals as really a taxonomy for change. And I encourage all of you to get really clear about where you fall on the spectrum of the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals, because you will find a community and a neighborhood in which you can live. And we started exploring some of the human services challenges, and that's what led us to some of the work that we did in hosting these community listening sessions and building what became Guardify. So it was an incubator model, and we created ideas and then we tested those hypotheses in real world scenarios. And that's one thing that we talk about in the book is how to innovate. And it's about creating small iterative approaches, usually not using technology at all, to test using a PowerPoint presentation or some other manual process to learn where the sweet spot is for technology to make a real impact. And so through that, we created Guardify, which is now the leading evidence management solution in the US. And that was really a story about data beyond just the impact and the purpose.
And of course, we met during an Amazon conference where Given Tech Labs actually presented, and I was blown away by yourself and Louise and your presentation of the kind of data you were gathering in very discrete places on issues that connected to very different audiences. And that's the importance here again in terms of workforce development and aging. We know that there's a future of work unfolding. We know that AI, which we'll get to at the very end, will reshape how we live and how we work. We know that jobs will change. We then have to adapt ourselves to that market, to that reality, and to make sure that we are preparing people the skills to thrive for a future that we've yet to see, right? But at the same time, as you mentioned Guardify and Given Tech Labs, there's something else that came through for me in your book. A chapter where you talked a lot about empathy and compassion. Because without empathy and compassion, you cannot be successful in the nonprofit space. Can you speak a little bit today to me about those virtues, empathy and compassion?
Absolutely. Well, we worked hard to create a broad-based advisory council across sectors, and we really worked on creating a set of principles for technology for the public interest. Whether you are creating new technology or looking at opportunities to bring technology into your organization. And one of the core principles that we really found to be across the board just sort of table stakes element is empathy, and needing to understand that you may not be the one with that problem. You may not be the one that has experienced that pain point, but you need to have empathy for the other person, for the user, for the job seeker, for the experience of someone else. And empathy and compassion, I will say, are two virtues that are not only critical to nonprofit work, they're paramount for any opportunity in the workforce. We really see the soft skills as coming through in this time of AI and technology. We need to be able to connect the human-centered design approaches that places like the Stanford D School and IDEO have written about so extensively. And we want to make sure that centering on empathy is a critical principle for all technology.
And it also guides our theory of change. So I'm pivoting through your book in a very unique way here, because we are, again, in the workforce space. We function or exist at the intersection of workforce and aging. We live in a country and an economy where the Americans who are 50 and over have a 37% labor force participation rate, which suggests that there are millions of older American workers who've given up or who have gone into the gig economy and trying to hustle a supplemental income source to stay afloat. 37% labor force participation rate. The last jobs report revealed that older Americans had a long-term unemployment rate of 25%. We're seeing the concentration of older Americans and folks from the Black and brown communities concentrated in occupations that have a very high probability of being changed or being wiped out because of technology. So our empathy and our compassion has to be framed by the experiences of the people that we're here to serve. Our compassion and empathy has to be framed by how we are telling their stories, not just to government, but to the media and to private philanthropy that have not stepped up to the plate when it comes to issues around aging or workforce development. Because another factoid is that less than 2% of our nation's philanthropic dollars goes into aging. which gets back to my earlier point, which country in the world would I rather be if I'm Asian? That's one. Two, less than 1% of philanthropic dollars goes into workforce development. Yet your data sources will tell us that we have major issues informed by geography, race, gender, and age when it comes to labor force issues and issues around occupations. So the importance of having a theory of change supported by data from other source to help us tell the story is critical to our ability to lead with passion and purpose. And that's what this book to me serves. I'm told I have 5 minutes remaining. I have another question I want to share with you. And this is about your thoughts on the kinds of qualities needed to be a purposeful leader in an environment of change. And I preface this by presenting a few people that I've known, some of whom were my mentors, who started small, but they had a goal in mind to fundamentally change or affect change in the lives of people that they were created to serve. Bill Shaw, Share Our Strength. It's a hunger program, which he started with his wife. It's now a $1 billion brand, offering food and nutrition supplies to needy families. Maynard Fuller started a group called Habitat for Humanity down in Georgia. It's now Habitat for Humanity International, a volunteer-based housing program that evolved into a global movement. Dorothy Stoneman built Youth Built out of a Harlem townhouse 45 years ago when she grabbed a few children that she found on the street and said, you know what, I want to put these kids to use. And they rehabilitated a house in Harlem. And out of that came a national movement called Youth Build. Wendy Kopp, Teach for America, now called Teach for All, started out as a Princeton or Harvard graduate who decided that she wanted to take young people into the classroom to inspire the next generation of leaders and kids from disadvantaged backgrounds. And she did it. Our friend Matt Swift started Concordia out of a dorm at Georgetown 15 years ago, a disruptor, and has created an organization that's meeting today in Portugal for the European Summit. But the idea of how to bring good people together from different perspectives to inform positive change across our societies can be accomplished by virtue of talented leaders who believe fundamentally in their ability and that of their colleagues to exercise real change in the community. So the theory of change is in many ways driven by leadership, supported by analysis and data. So in your mind, as we close today, and keep in mind, a lot of our audience members are in the labor and workforce space, and there are some great leaders among them. What are the prerequisites you feel for success if you're trying to drive successful change for individuals from marginalized communities, often ignored and often left out? I yield to you.
Wow, no pressure. Well, that's
no
a
pressure.
lot. Well, first of all, thank you for this time, Gary. And I think that you represent the kind of leader that really does take an approach where you need to have an eye on the future, to be a visionary in the way that if you were leading your troops through battle, or if you were predicting the future, you need to be a part of it. And dreaming big is part of it. So I don't want anyone to feel limited by the constraints of today, whether that's from funders, from clients, from competitors. So I think first, start with a clean slate, remove all barriers, and find a path to create a broader vision of what you may not even think is possible today, but the way that you think it should be. Because we're often reminded that the technology that we use today wasn't invented, when we were growing up. And the technology that our kids and grandkids will use certainly hasn't even been imagined yet. So number one, I would say have the ability to think big and then start small. So really start with an inner circle, whether that's employees or stakeholders or customers or clients or those that you seek to create intimacy with. Create that intimacy through authentic connections. Be authentic as a leader, be curious, ask questions, and then document what you learn, those failures and success. It's so often we see case studies of what's working and leaders that want to become thought leaders, only talking about when their products work. But where we really learn and grow as an organization and as a culture is by sharing what doesn't work and helping others come along. And I think authenticity will go a long way in this work. And if you haven't had the experience personally, go out and talk to those that have.
Shelly, this royal thrones of kings, this scepter's isle, this earth's majesty, this happy breed of men, this little world, this precious stone set in the silver sea. For those in this audience today who would like to follow Shelly and to track down her book that will be released in the next couple of months, please visit www.thislittleworld.org. Thank you very much.
And come see us at the Equity Summit in September in DC. Through technology, you can all join us. We had 1,000 people, I think, last year. So I'm looking forward to continuing the conversation.
You are a wonderful board member. The Equity Summit on September 24th.
That's right.
2024. Thank you very much. Shelly Kurtz.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Gary.